Welcome to our third video in our online series involving statistical analysis. Today's video will be on how to use our graphing calculators to solve the median and mean questions and the other central tendency questions that we used in the problems the last 2 days. To begin, we recap with the median questions. Now, when we need to solve for a median and then to graph it as a box and whisker plot, there were 5 key data points that we needed to solve for. The first one, of course, was the median, followed by the minimum, the maximum, the first and third quartiles. And while sometimes our data is conveniently placed in order, you can guarantee that on an assessment, there will be situations where your data will not be in order, and therefore you need to be able to either A, list them all out in order and carefully not misplace any of them, and then solve that information, or B, you can use our graphing calculators to do all that work for us. In today's video, we're going to be covering how to do that. To begin, the first thing you want to do is you want to always hit the second button on your calculator, followed by the plus sign, and then choose the option to reset your calculator or clear all lists, because any data that was there beforehand will cause some issues for your calculator, and it is always in your best interest to reset that to not mess up the problem. From there, you return back to the home screen. You're going to choose your option for stat, which is located on the left-hand side of the calculator to the left of the left arrow. When you click stat followed by edit, that will then allow you to enter your list of data. Now, in the interest of time for this video, I already preloaded all of the data points from our existing example, but you'll notice for each of these pieces right here, I did not place them in order chronologically, just to show that you do not need to have your data in order for this to work out appropriately. So what I did was I counted down the columns, but when you enter this data, you can enter it anywhere you need to as long as all 30 numbers are represented. Please pause the video at this time until you're able to enter this data, and then after you've done so and have checked that you haven't entered anything in incorrectly, please unpause the video and resume. Okay, so now that you have entered in all your data and you've checked that everything's been entered in correctly, what you need to do next is you need to go back to your calculator. You need to hit the button for statistics again. But now instead of editing the list, we now want to calculate the list. So if you click to the right, you have an option to load up the calculator option. And the one that we're going to be using today is going to be the one variable statistics. So if you choose the option for one variable statistics and then hit enter, you'll be given a extreme amount of data. I'm actually going to slide this over just so everything can be shown on the screen at one time. And in this set of data, if you notice over here on the right-hand side, we have our minimum value is given to us, which is 65. Our maximum value is given to us, which is 96. And then the 3 values that we had to calculate yesterday, the median, the first quartile, and the third quartile, all 5 of those values were provided for us. With all that information entered, the only time-consuming portion of solving these is in entering the data carefully so that way you don't make any mistakes. So let's take the information that we have and let's enter it. So we said our median was 82. Our first quartile was 77. Our third quartile was 90. Minimum was 65. Maximum was 96. And to graph that, we drew a line at 65 for the box and whisker, a line at 77, a line at 82, a line at 90, and then a line at 96. We connect the quartiles, and then we extend to the extremes. And that was how we drew our box and whisker plot yesterday. Once again, the amount of time that goes into these questions is only spent on entering the data. To physically solve the data is significantly faster than it was previously. Now, in the second lesson, we learned how to do the mean. Now, if we had to solve for the mean and the standard deviation the same way that we did yesterday involving 30 numbers, we would be here a lot longer. However, going back to the same option of taking our data and entering it in, and once again, making sure that we carefully enter in our data, followed by that same button presses of statistics, click calc to calculate, one variable statistics, and then hitting enter. You'll notice where on the left-hand side, it gave us our median central tendency information. On the left-hand side, it's going to give us our mean central tendency information. And you'll notice 82 is what they gave us as our mean, which if you sit down and calculate all these numbers by hand, add them up and divide by 30, you would be getting 82. If you were to then follow through all of our steps that we covered in class, you also will find the standard deviation. The one thing I want you guys to acknowledge, though, is when looking at these 6 terms right here, this number right here, this is one of the Greek letter S's. This is a Greek lowercase Greek s, and this refers to your standard deviation, not s of x. This one is sigma of x. So in this case, we find that our standard deviation is going to be 8, and that our mean is going to be 82. None of the other pieces of information are important to us, and is good to know to confirm that we did enter in 30 data points. But the other 3 terms, the sigma of x, the sigma of x squared, and the s of x, these 3 we do not want to use at all. Returning back to our data, we now want to draw our bell curve. So let's remove the calculator for now. First thing we'll do is on our graph, we will draw a tall line up from our mean. And that's going to be our mean value. That's going to be the central location for the bell curve that we need to draw. Our standard deviation is going to count by 8, so 82 is going to go to 90. Your next height should be approximately maybe 2/3 as high. From 90, we are then going to go to 98. That should be about half as high as the previous one. And then this one, unfortunately, is going to go off the graph a little bit, so let's just extend the graph to here. And this one should be about the same height as each of those little hash marks on the physical axes themselves. So when we finish this one off, we're going to basically connect each of those points, and that is going to be our bell curve on the left-hand side of our data. So you want to make this one tall. This one is approximately 75 to 80% of the height. This one is about 25% of the height, and then this one is very, very small. Do not actually write those percentages there. In the next video, we'll be covering what are the actual percentages of standard deviation. But for right now, know that that is how you could best sketch your bell curve. Going to the left-hand side of our data, we are now going to be drawing the data to the left. So starting at 82 and going down by 8, we're going to draw a line at 74. That is 75, so let's slide this over one. Once we get to 74, our next point is going to be at 66. And after 66, our next point is going to be 58. After which we want to connect each of those points. But because our data does extend beyond the 3rd standard deviation, you want your graph to taper down to the asymptote that is the line itself. So this should be extending past each of those points. So from here, we now see that we have a graph that represents our data involving the mean and the standard deviation. Now for physical standard deviation itself, we're going to be covering these in a separate lesson, but it is always helpful to remember that while median, if we go back to our median example, median is always nicely represented into 25% intervals. And for the sake of comparing these two, let's put them side by side. Our 2 collections of data. So if we look at our data, our median is very nicely broken into 25% intervals, but standard deviation, if we remember, is not broken up as nicely. It turns out for standard deviation, the larger boxes will represent 34.1% of the data. The next tier will represent 13.6% of the data. And the last sections will represent 2.1% of the data. Now these numbers do not, I repeat, do not need to be memorized. They'll be provided to you on your equations page for the upcoming quiz or test. But you just need to acknowledge that the reason why each of those groupings is not evenly split, as it is with the median graph of box and whisker, is because the data is not supposed to be tapered equally distributed in accordance to the mean. So to confirm that we did everything correctly, what you should do then is go to your homework from the second video. And for each of those collections of data, what I would like for you to do is plug those into your calculator one at a time and confirm that you get the same scores for your mean and standard deviation as the ones that you calculated out by hand. At this time, this test level question is the epitome of what we're trying to accomplish within this online course as far as graphing standard deviations, means, medians, and quartiles. And the way we will finish the rest of this lesson is that we will be solving for the physical comparisons between the two. Because as we acknowledged in our notes for the last two videos, some of these graphs have strengths and some of them have weaknesses. The biggest one, of course, and the one that I want you guys to remember the most, is that in a bell curve, outliers are important, and in a median graph is outliers are ignored. And once you take into consideration that that is one of the major differences between the two, you can then start to compare the differences between these physical two graphs. Thank you for finishing this video. At this time, please go back and check your homeworks for both of your lessons, both your bell curve graph as well as your box and whisker plot. And then using the calculator utility, check all your answers to make sure that you did well with everything else. If you were able to solve each of these questions and your accuracy is at 95% or greater, meaning that between all of the questions that we did, you at most made one mistake difference, feel confident that you can handle anything that I can put forth for you on a quiz or test. The only thing that could possibly cause some issues would be the solving questions occurring at the end, and that we'll be covering in class when we return on the 6th of January. Thank you guys, and I'll see you back when we return from the holiday.